Welcome everyone to the ordinary meeting of Council for the 14th of April 2020, which I now declare open. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to members of the public who are viewing at home on Facebook and via social media. Due to the stay-at-home and social distancing directions from the state and federal governments at this time, it is not possible for members of the public to join us in person tonight. However, our meetings remain open to the public via our online live stream. The live stream will be a bit different to usual as well, but we'll do our best given these circumstances. You will also notice that councillor speeches will be shorter as we are trying to get through our council business tonight. We hope that you respect these decisions. So on behalf of Moonee Valley City Council, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the land on which we're meeting, that of the Wurundjeri Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Councillors, I have received a request for an approved leave of absence from Councillor Sorais for the period of 1st of April to the 27th of April 2020 inclusive. Can I please have a motion that Councillor Sorais' leave be approved? Moved Councillor Gauchimarici, seconded Councillor Sharp. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is unanimous. I have also received a request for an apology for tonight's meeting from Councillor Lawrence. Can I please have a motion that Councillor Lawrence's apology be approved? Moved Councillor Sypek, seconded Councillor Sharp. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Councillor, can I please have a mover and seconder that the minutes from the ordinary meeting of Council held on Tuesday the 10th of March be confirmed? Moved Councillor Gauchimarici, seconded Councillor Sypek. I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Does any councillor have a conflict of interest on any item on the agenda this evening? Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. I have an indirect conflict of interest due to conflicting duty on both items 10.3 and 10.6 for reasons previously disclosed to the CEO.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a conflict in 10.3 due to conflicting duties and my business. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Any other councillor? No. Presentations. Now, on behalf of Council, I would like to acknowledge the recent passing of a very active community member of the Moonee Valley community, Yvonne Leslie Moon, who on the 26th of March. Yvonne was 71 years old. Yvonne was awarded an Order of Australia Medal, an OAM, for services to supporting women and families affected by ovarian cancer. She was presented with the Spirit of Moonee Valley Outstanding Award in 2012. She was the founder of ROCAN, set by the Rotary Club of Williamstown Rotary, a former director of the Keilor East Community Bank, and managed events and promotions for the Union Road and Centreway Traders. Our thoughts are with her family at this time. Councillors, do we have any other presentations for tonight? Okay, well, we do have two petitions that will be tabled tonight. Can I, Councillor Marshall, would you like to present your petition?
Thank you. I have a petition that's been received with 39 signatures, and this petition requests Council and the Level Crossing Removal Project to act to reinstate the no entry restriction into Sherborne Street from Buckley Street, Essendon, and to do so to ensure the safety of Lowther Hall and St Columba's students, local residents, cyclists, pedestrians and commuters. So I would like to move that Council 1 receives and notes the hard copy petition regarding a request to reinstate the no entry restriction from Buckley Street into Sherborne Street, Essendon. 2, refers this matter to the General Manager, City Development for investigation, reporting back to Council. And 3, advises the petition organiser accordingly.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. So could I please have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Nation, and I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Councillor Gauchimarici, can you please present your petition?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. An online petition has been received by Council with over 5,100 signatures protesting the planning permit application currently with Heritage Victoria, which seeks the subdivision of historic North Park Estate in Woodland Street, Essendon. So I would like to move that Council resolves to 1, receive and note the online petition regarding opposition to the planning permit currently with Heritage Victoria, which seeks subdivision of North Park Estate in Woodland Street, Essendon. 2, refers this matter to the Group Manager Planning for investigation and reporting back to Council. And 3, advise the petition organiser accordingly.
Thank you, Councillor Gauthier-Marici. Can I please have a seconder? Councillor Sharp, and I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Okay, public question time. We now come to public question time, and we have received a number of questions for tonight. As we do not have residents in the public gallery tonight, I propose that we move to suspend the provisions in our meeting procedure protocol which requires questioners to be present in the gallery. That will enable me to read the questions that have been submitted in advance and read the responses. Councillors, can I please have a mover that Council resolves to suspend the public question provisions in its meeting procedure protocol to allow questions from the gallery to be read and answered by the Mayor for this meeting? Move Councillor Gauthier-Marici, seconded Councillor Sharp. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is unanimous. All 8 questions relate to a report on tonight's agenda titled Coldclough Court, Strathmore, Lot 4 on PS 705-374C, Constructions of 2 Dwellings Amendment. The first 2 questions are from Sam Bleck. The question reads, given the length of time and opportunities for companies working at 4 Coldclough Court to acknowledge non-compliances and the inaccurate land levels depicted in the endorsed planning documentation, including at the time of permit application 2016, upon commencement on site October 18, at the time the slabs were prepared November 2018, when the slabs were completed December 2018, during the first enforcement investigation December 2018, January 2019, after a notice to comply January 2019, during the second council enforcement investigation October 2019, as well as false information provided to council during both enforcement investigations, the obstruction of identifying the non-compliances during both enforcement investigations or any time in between. What actions will council take to prevent this occurring in other developments in the future, and how will council ensure that money spent across this time period and into the future relating to 4 Coldclough Court, including personnel, land surveys commissioned, other resources, etc., will come from people related to the subject site and not be the burden of all Moonee Valley City Council ratepayers? Please note that these responses have been provided by our council officers. So the response to this question is, the application to amend the planning permit enables the consideration of the discrepancies between the approved and as-built works, as well as further changes proposed in response to compliance with the planning scheme. Public notification of the amended permit application was given so that adjoining property owners were aware of the changes and given the opportunity to make submissions. Whilst the issues of compliance and enforcement that have occurred to date are of serious concern, the amended permit application must be assessed on its merit against the relevant planning assessment framework. The determination of this application must thus ensure an acceptable level of compliance with the planning scheme and still be achieved, having regard to any objections received. Council officers are employed to serve the entire community, and there is no option to recoup monies from a select group of residents. Sam Fleck's second question. Given the number of companies involved in the 4 Coldclough site that did not notify council or the VBA of how significantly the dwellings diverge from the endorsed planning documentation, as well as how many allowed statutory protections for adjoining neighbours, such as protection work notices and dilapidation reports, were evaded, causing immediate and ongoing material detriment and loss of amenity to multiple adjoining neighbours for over 1 year, what assurances would council have that any endorsed plans resulting from the amendment application would be implemented accurately, and what actions would council take to ensure this and that MVCC residents would be protected from any ongoing deviations from the endorsed planning documentation and/or illegal works? Again, the response from our council officers. Council will continue to administer and enforce the Planning and Environment Act and the planning scheme to facilitate the fair and orderly planning of land throughout the municipality. Full consideration of amenity impacts to adjoining property owners will be given where the planning scheme calls for it, as is the case here. The determination of the amended planning permit application must have regard to the same planning assessment framework as the original development, having regard to the current conditions of the site and its surrounds. The enforcement of the amended application will follow the required legislated steps to ensure compliance with the original conditions and those that are amended in this process. Council's enforcement teams are well aware of the development, and the enforcement matters will be assessed on their individual circumstances, merit, facts, and with the necessary scrutiny. Our next two questions are from Kate Goggins. Question 3. Given that the dwellings at 4 Colclough Court, Strathmore, have been constructed higher than the approved planning permit and plans, and this was not identified by the private building surveyors to the extent that council was notified or an amendment sought at the time of regulatory mandatory slab inspections, how could council be confident that both dwellings do not pose a serious and ongoing structural integrity and safety risks to any inhabitants of either dwelling or adjoining properties now and into the future? The response provided by council officers is, the structural integrity from a building is not a planning consideration and therefore not relevant to this matter. Issues of this nature are dealt with under the Building Act. Question 4. Does council believe it is appropriate that retrospective amendments be approved for non-compliant building works that remove initial conditions imposed on an original planning permit to protect adjoining property owners from material detriment and loss of amenity, especially when those property owners can already demonstrate how their approval has and would continue to case them material detriment and loss of amenity? The response to the question is, the existence of material detriment or loss of amenity does not determine whether approval should be granted for a planning application. It is whether those impacts are acceptable or unacceptable that would, amongst other policy considerations, determine whether approval should be granted. As with the original application, through the assessment and as captured in the officer's report, it is considered that amenity impacts in this application are acceptable subject to conditions. The next 4 questions are from Mr. and Mrs. Nicholas and Catherine Pantelides. Question 5. What future community impacts can council reasonably foresee occurring should any amendment be approved for 4 Colclough Court, Strathmore, that contradicts the conditions imposed in the original planning permit, setting a precedent that other owners or developers could follow to develop buildings that do not align with community standards, the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme or other programs initiated to protect the community which cause long-term material detriment and amenity impacts to adjoining property owners? The response to this question is council will continue to administer and enforce the Planning and Environment Act and the planning scheme to facilitate the fair and orderly planning of land throughout the municipality. All applications and enforcement matters will be assessed on their individual merit, facts and circumstances. Full consideration of amenity impacts to adjoining property owners will be given where the planning scheme calls for it, as is the case here. Question 6. Given the case of 4 Colclough Court, especially considering the failure of the owners to accurately complete a form verifying that the information contained in their amendment application is accurate, in what ways would council feel confident that the owners and other entity or entities they pay to work on site is capable of adhering to regulations and is capable of completing any additional approved works in accordance with any endorsed plans if they are approved? The response to the question is, the application to amend the planning permit enables the consideration of the discrepancies between the approved and as-built works, as well as further changes proposed in response to compliance with the planning scheme. The determination of this application must ensure an acceptable level of compliance with the planning scheme will still be achieved, having regard to any objections received. Whilst the issue of compliance and enforcement that have occurred to date are of serious concern, the amended permit application must be assessed on its merit against the relevant planning assessment framework. 2 more questions. Question 7. We can already see the impacts that the build at 4 Colclough Court has made on our retaining wall, which has now been compromised. What will council be doing to ensure that there will be no further impacts to our retaining wall? We have 2 young children who should be able to play in our backyard safely. The response to the question is, Council appreciates the concerns regarding safety of any structure, be it a wall or the dwellings themselves. The structural integrity of a building or retaining wall is not a planning consideration per se, and therefore not relevant to this matter. Issues of this nature are dealt with under the Building Act. And the final question, question number 8. We also currently don't have a lot of natural light in our living area. What will Council be doing to ensure that no additional fence height is increased or adding additional external structures, for example, verandas, pergolas and alfrescos? Any of these structures, as well as increased fence height, will definitely block all natural light. The response to the question is, ultimately, the height of any boundary fencing must be resolved outside of Council as it is a civil matter between the two affected landowners. Council's role to enforce the planning permit and to ensure no direct overlooking is caused due to the height of any such fencing. If there are further changes to the height of boundary fencing that occurs through negotiations between landowners that brings compliance with overlooking requirements into question, this may be necessary a further amendment to the permit. Any structures in the rear yards that may be proposed in future would require planning approval and, if material detriment was potentially caused, public notification. Any decisions would be made on their merits. Thank you, everyone. Obviously, our questions from the public are equally important, even if the public can't be in the gallery tonight. Number 9 on the agenda tonight is reports from specials committees. However, we don't have any reports from special committees, so we will move on to report 10.1, which is a planning application at 4 Colclough Court, Strathmore, Lot 4 on PS 705374C, construction of 2 dwelling amendments. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Gauci-Marici.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move an alternate motion that Council issue a notice of a decision to amend a planning permit in relation to application number MV 916/2015/A at 4 Colclough Court, Strathmore, Lot 4 on PS 705374C in accordance with the following. Condition 1A modified to read, proposed wording, boundary fencing provided to a minimum height of 2.2 metres along the eastern boundary and otherwise provided where required in accordance with clause 55.046 overlooking of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme in lieu of the current wording, boundary fencing provided to 1.7 metres from the finished floor level of ground floor habitable rooms where required in accordance with clause 55.046 overlooking of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme. The inclusion of condition 1J, the finished levels of the open space car space of dwelling 2 are shown on all plans in accordance with section diagram SS. The inclusion of condition 1K, the provision of safety barriers between the car spaces of each dwelling and the eastern boundary fence in consultation with and approved by Council's Traffic and Transport Unit. The inclusion of condition 1L, the maximum height of each storage shed not to exceed any adjacent boundary fence, and a notation that any future structure in this area may not exceed the height of the adjacent boundary fencing. The inclusion of condition 1M, accurately show the location of the development at 5 Colclough Court, Strathmore. The inclusion of condition 1N, external paved areas within the secluded open space areas to be deleted and original natural ground levels retained where possible in consultation with and approved by Council's Development Engineering Unit. The inclusion of condition 1O, a notation that all retaining walls in proximity to the eastern boundary wall are to be removed. The inclusion of condition 1P, all ground floor habitable room windows and glazed doors to be fixed and obscured or otherwise screened to a maximum transparency of 25% to a height of 1.7 metres from finished floor level. The inclusion of condition 15C, planting along the northern and eastern boundaries to screen views of each dwelling. Planting in these areas should be evergreen species planted at a mature, semi-mature age and capable of reaching a minimum mature height of 4 metres. The inclusion of the following permit note. This permit has been amended to modify condition 1A, include conditions 1J to P and 15C, and to modify the approved development pursuant to sections 72 to 76B of the Planning and Environment Act 1987.
Thank you, Councillor Gauci-Marici. Do I have a seconder for the motion? Councillor Sharp. Councillor Gauci-Marici, would you like to speak to the motion?
I will, and I will keep it fairly brief. Whilst it reads like a fairly simple amendment to a planning application, the history of the permit and its construction is why it's come before us, and obviously the questions in public question time alluded to that. The original permit in 2016 then went to 2018, where construction commenced and concerns were raised about the height. 2019, some soil was brought in and the ground level heights were changed and illegally constructed retaining walls were installed. So what the proposal in front of us sought to do was to seek retrospective approval for the deviation from the approved plans. There are still a number of concerns within those deviations and amended plans which this alternate motion seeks to address. They include privacy, overlooking and safety concerns. They are fairly self-explanatory in each of them. The ones I just want to touch on really briefly are around the car spaces, which are currently positioned such that if you were to accidentally go through the fence, you would land in your neighbour's backyard, which is obviously a significant safety concern. So those are conditioned through bollards, which are meeting Australian standards. And obviously the retaining walls were illegally constructed, so are just to be removed, and the permit conditions reflect that. And that the permit conditions need to be complied with correctly prior to any occupancy permit as part of that. So I could give you a much longer version, but that's the high level of it.
Thank you, Councillor Gatchmarici. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just quickly, I think this is an example of when a planning permit goes wrong. It really does go wrong. So I thank Councillor Gatchmarici for her work in getting this alternative up presented to us tonight. The situation we have before us has been very difficult, you know, a situation like this coming to us, personally, I'd prefer not to support it. There's too many bits of this building that have been built illegally, but obviously that's not going to help the neighbours that have the issues around there, and it's not going to solve the problem if we reject this, because it will just go to VCAT, and that's another long drawn out process for the neighbours. And obviously they've been concerned for a long time about their amenity and what is happening on site. So we're here. I'm happy to support the alternative put up by Councillor Gatchmarici, and I hope that this goes some way in allaying some of the concerns and issues that have been presented to us with this planning application. And I hope that the residents can understand all this and can understand that hopefully this will be a better outcome for them.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Would any other councillor like to speak on this item? No, I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 10.2 on the agenda is a planning application at 7 Etzel Street, Airport West, Lot 42 on Lot Plan 020166 and Lot 1 on Title Plan 963081M, construction of 2 dwellings amendment. Councillors, do I have a motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move an alternative for a refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek.
Would you like me to read it out?
Yes, please.
The council issue a notice of decision to refuse the amended a planning permit in relation to the planning permit application MV/142/2017/A for the construction of 2 dwellings at 7 Etzel Street, Airport West, Lot 42 of Plan Subdivision 020166 on the following grounds. The proposal fails to meet the objectives and the strategies of clauses 5.01.2s.
Sorry, Councillor Sypek, just for clarification, that's clause 15.01?
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, 15.01.2s, the building design, and 21.06-4 of the urban design of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, and would cause unacceptable detrimental impacts on the amenities of neighbouring properties. The proposal will have an adverse effect on the amenities of the surrounding dwellings, and the amendment reneges on the original accepted plans that were agreed to by all parties, residents, the applicants, councils, at a consultation meeting. The amendment has reinstated the bulk at the rear that was originally removed as a part of the agreement with the residents.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Councillor Sypek, point 3 was different in the words I've got in front of me. Can you just read point 3 again for
The
clarification?
amendment reneges on the original accepted plans that were agreed by all parties at a consultation meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Do I have a seconder for Councillor Sypek's motion? Councillor Sharp. Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak to your motion, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll make this very, very brief. A few years back, this application came to council. There was a consultation meeting with the council, the applicant and majority of the residents that were impacted. And we came to an agreement where we allowed the actual building to creep forward by 3 metres and reduce some of the bulk at the back, which would have an adverse effect on all the neighbours. And that was agreed to by the applicant, by everyone. And lo and behold, a year and a little bit over, it comes back under the umbrella of the secondary consent, which I find is a bit of a loophole here, which doesn't need to be advertised. And it was only through the due diligence of one of the neighbours that realised that this application was coming through again. And they've reinstated all the bulk at the back, but kept all the creep forward at the front from the original plans. So, Madam Mayor, I'm sorry, but you can't have your cake and eat it. And this would set a precedent for every builder to renege on the original plans and come back under the umbrella of the secondary consent.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Councillor Sharp. No. Would any other councillor like to speak on this item? No. I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 10.3, we have 2 conflicts of interest that were declared at the start of the meeting. Councillor Sharp and Councillor Nation will now leave the room, and we do have quorum with 5 councillors still in the room. So item 10.3 on the agenda is COVID-19 support package and hardship policy. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? Councillor Marshall.
Thank you. I'd like to move that Council adopt the Moonee Valley Council Support Package, Attachment A. It's point A. B. Adopt the Financial Hardship Policy, Procedure and Guidelines, which provides access to financial relief for local residents during the current pandemic. Attachment B. C. Notes the impact on about 60% of council services during the current state of emergency and our response to community needs. Attachment C. D. Notes the measures that are in place to manage council's workforce and communicate to the community outlined in this report. E. Continues to monitor any escalation of impacts over the coming months to determine if further changes need to be made to the recovery plan. F. Continue to support and engage our community by 1. Considering alternative delivery modes for council services. 2. Ways to engage those who are socially isolated or may need support with mental health. And 3. Ways to support sports and community clubs to stay engaged with their members. G. Regularly assess council's communication in relation to COVID-19, ensuring there are measures in place to have frequent and accurate communication responses to community queries. H. Writes to the Municipal Association of Victoria, MAV, and Victorian Local Governance Association, VLGA, requesting they waive membership fees for the upcoming financial year so councils can dedicate those resources to mitigate the effects of COVID-19 on their communities. And I conveys a sincere thanks and gratitude of the councillors on behalf of council and the community to all staff of Moonee Valley City Council for the work they are undertaking to respond to the crisis, particularly frontline staff involved in kindergartens, childcare, aged care, disability services, the transfer station and other customer service roles.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Do I have a seconder for that motion?
Yep.
Councillor Sypek. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak on this?
Thank you. Well, who can believe we are here? But we are, and this is really the time for all levels of government, including local government, to step up and to help our community through this and to provide as much support as we can during what are the most challenging of times. What's proposed here is a package of targeted support of about $5 million in value, which I think is a great package that we've put together. It's a combination of support for our local businesses, many of whom are doing it just so incredibly tough, but also who have been so adaptable and innovative, and it's been really incredible and heartening to actually watch and see how businesses have responded. So the support that's proposed includes rent and fee relief, suspending special rate schemes, and importantly too, and this will be discussed in the next item, introducing a COVID-19 related grant scheme, which will be able to assist businesses. And certainly as individuals and organisations, now is the time to really think about your purchasing choices, and if you're lucky enough to still be in a job and you can afford it, to pay that bit more to support your local businesses wherever you can. The second stream that we're considering is for community groups, and what's proposed is to waive fees and a number of other payments that community groups would otherwise be required to pay. And then for the broader community, we have a financial hardship policy, and this is in relation to rates and various fees and charges to assist those who are struggling financially because of COVID-19, because the reality is the last thing we want is for people who may have lost their job or lost their business to be worrying about whether they can afford to pay their rates. Now, it's stating the obvious to say that public safety in all of this has to be paramount, and that means we can't go on about our lives as we otherwise might like to, and that really is tough for some people more than others. And so please just make sure if you need help, if you need assistance, reach out, and if council's not the right place to provide the assistance, we can certainly refer you on. I think that's really important, that we make sure that people aren't left behind. And certainly on a personal level, I've got 2 parents who are ill, and I can't say how grateful I am to live in a country that has acted very quickly to minimise the spread of the virus. And decision making in times like these is tough, and it may not be perfect, we may get things wrong, but we are doing what we can to make sure that we minimise the spread of this virus and protect public safety. And just in finishing, I'd just like to say thank you to all our wonderful staff. You really are just valued, you're appreciated, and you're absolutely essential, both now and also as we recover together as a community in the coming months ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Sypek.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I won't repeat what Councillor Marshall said. She's said quite elegantly what this whole motion's about. But I'd just like to mention that businesses in Moonee Valley are hurting, but what I'd like to say is I'm very, very proud to say that I live in Moonee Valley. And the reason why is I've run a lot of businesses in the area, and not just only in my ward, but in all wards. And the feedback that I've been getting from a lot of local businesses is saying that they're getting fantastic support from our residents. And even if it's a small gesture, just to go and buy a cup of coffee or just to shop locally in the local IGA store, it's been incredibly heartwarming to hear these businesses saying that they can't believe how much support that they're getting from our community. And I just want to say on behalf of Moonee Valley Council, thank you to our residents for doing such a great job of supporting our local businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Any other councillor like to speak on this? Councillor Cusack.
First of all, I want to endorse obviously what the mover and seconder of this motion have said, and most of all the bouquets that they have given to Moonee Valley Council staff. A lot of people don't realise how much our staff are very much at the front line in delivering of services and so on like that. But to develop a package like this has also taken a considerable amount of energy and thinking to get to a point where we can put $5 million on the stump basically, plus keep on looking at things down the track and have the capacity to do that. I'm sure that in the upcoming budget, whenever that might happen, we will certainly continue to have a focus around support for businesses and people who have been impacted by COVID-19. I just wanted to focus on a couple of things though. One is that the community grants area, which is now going under a substantial change and will do for the next 12 months, is while it has a focus very much around obviously what businesses can do and so on like that, think broadly. The business notion is things still covers people who might be in a business in the arts community. It still might be people who are doing small venture activities and needing to get support, or were in the process of just building a business and found themselves up against the wall. We have also, I think the most important thing around this is that Council wants to make its effort as pointy as it possibly can be towards the needs of our community. So it doesn't mean that we will always get it right from day one. Our hardship package is a guidelines and policy, but there will be possibly people who might find themselves on the edge. The consideration in that is that, of course, state and federal government are providing many supports, and we don't want to duplicate that. But there are people who are slipping through the gap. And just some quick examples are around food security. It's about support for people who are very vulnerable in our community, and so on like that. And it's an important aspect of this package that is where it's being aimed at. And I just give you another for instance. Many of the people in this community who are volunteers, especially in around provision of food and so on like that, are older people. And by definition, they're at a very vulnerable point. Oh, can I have a little bit more? They're at a very vulnerable point in their lives through COVID-19. So we now need very much for maybe some of our other people who do voluntary work in this community to step up and have a think. Maybe it might be a local football club or sporting club of some description with young, healthy, athletic young people who have got time on their hands to maybe start getting themselves organised in filling the gap where some of the older volunteers have been involved. And I'm sure that we could accommodate that. And so I'll finish on that note and commend this whole motion. It's well thought out, well directed, and it's also a smart ploy that we will continue to build on if necessary.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Councillor Gaczmaricci.
Thank you. I would like to again commend the motion and concur with the others' thoughts, so I won't repeat what they've said. What I would like to do is just highlight the incredible number of initiatives that we delivered literally in the last couple of weeks that was just due to insight and thoughtfulness from our officers who turned around and said, well, how can we do this differently? How could we reach those communities? And I think there, as much as we are incredibly grateful to our frontline staff and they're doing a wonderful job, we also need to just say thanks to the library staff who went, actually, let's do this online, or the aged care team who are calling each of the residents who would normally have had a visit, the business team who transformed online workshops for how businesses dealt through this situation. We know how hard our community is doing it. We know how hard our businesses and our residents and all of our community groups are doing at the moment. So please just continue to support each other, support your neighbours, support our businesses, and be kind to each other. And thank you for this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Gaczmaricci. I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. We will get Councillor Sharp and Councillor Nation to come back in for items 10.4. Obviously, due to COVID-19, councillors are keeping their speeches short. I know that all councillors would have loved to have spoken for probably a lot longer than what they did, so I do encourage councillors to put what they like onto their social media channels or whatever they choose to in terms of what they otherwise may have said or wanted to say in their speeches, and thank you for keeping them brief. Thank you, Councillor Sharp and Councillor Nation, who are now back in the room. So the next item on the agenda is the Community Funding Program COVID-19 Grants Response. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? Councillor Gaczmaricci.
Thank you. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Gaczmaricci, and seconded by Councillor Cusack. Councillor Gaczmaricci, would you like to speak on this item?
I will, thank you. Obviously, as was highlighted in the last item, there will be significant changes in the way in which we can and should support our community. We had run a grants program which a significant, over 70% of the application events didn't end up being run or support didn't end up being provided because of the pandemic. So this proposal is to find different ways and innovative ways to support the recovery that our community will need to go through. So certainly I would encourage our residents, businesses and otherwise to think about the eligibility criteria obviously, but to think about ways in which we can support the community recovering in Moonee Valley and the processes through which this will occur.
Thank you, Councillor Gaczmaricci. Councillor Cusack.
Thank you, Mayor. In supporting this recommendation, it is part of that suite of things that Council has talked about previously in the previous motion. This outlines specifically how we are attempting to make our grants more targeted towards the needs of industry and business in this area in our community. Of course, again, as I said before, not overlapping the work that is being done by the Commonwealth and State. There's a small irony in this, because I've argued for a long time that our grants needed to be have a capacity to provide or take up a greater risk and have a greater appetite for risk in awarding grants. And I tend to argue that maybe this council hasn't done that by and large. It's gone for a level of safety. But when the time has been called and when people need to do things, it has come that we are now prepared to take risks. And I think that this is really, really important, that small businesses, Moonee Valley is made up very much of a lot of mum and dad businesses and very small entrepreneurs, and we need to get in behind them and ask them if they need a hand up and get them to tell us a little bit more about what they need, and we're prepared to do that over the next 12 months, not just over the next few months.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Would any other councillor like to speak on this item? Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. I will keep it brief, obviously, but I'd just like to note with this report and this allocation of funding that it is money that was already allocated to the previous grant stream, so it's a very worthwhile use of council funds. It's also a process, as outlined in the report, that could potentially overlap council terms, which is important, that there's that continuity, particularly if there's a new council at the start of next year, and also that assessment period, reducing it from 6 to 8 weeks to 2 to 3 weeks, to ensure that we get support to those individuals or those groups or those businesses, the people who are most in need. I obviously commend the officers for acting on this so quickly. It is a evolving day by day situation, so for us as the level of government closest to the people, as they say, it's important that we act as a safety net to ensure no one gets left behind, and particularly those that might not be able to get support from federal or state governments.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Would any other councillor like to speak on this item? No, I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Agenda item 10.5 is the amendment C194 Moon - introducing the Moonee Valley Development Contributions Plan 2018 revised 2020 into the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme. Councillors, do I have a motion? Move, Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, I'd like to move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cusack. Councillor Marshall.
Well, we are almost there. And for people who aren't familiar with development contributions plans, basically the idea underpinning them is that if you develop in a particular part of the world and you make a profit, microphone failure, a profit from that development, that really you should make a contribution towards the infrastructure needs that your development creates. And it would have been great that if this had been in place some time ago, but it is a really complex piece of work and it's a very long process, and I thank our officers for seeing it through to this point. It's interesting to note that the panel said that our plan was justified and also complimented council on the work that it had undertaken, which is always nice to hear. The panel did recommend that there be some amendments, mainly to deal with some points of clarification and to resolve some ambiguities, and that's what's set out in the appendices to the report. It's important to note too that the DCP will be reviewed annually just to see how it's going, and then there'll be a more formal review every 4 years when the planning scheme review is conducted. So it will be something that is constantly reviewed. And out of it, once it is finally in our scheme, we're expected to collect about $71.9 million of contributions towards infrastructure projects in Moonee Valley. And we know we've got a big infrastructure project plan over many years, so that is at least something towards those.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Cusack.
As Councillor Marshall said, this is getting to the very, very end of a very long road. The importance of this amendment is very much that the developer contributions are now going to be applied in a structured project-based way, that we're confident that the council will be able to deliver over a period of time, and that these projects will always be and remain relevant to the development of areas and supports community assets that support the kind of changes that have occurred in lifestyle in our municipality. It's an important issue that with that change we've seen the high rise, but this is now about how the high rise blends, integrates or works with the rest of our community and our areas and our services, etc.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Would any other councillor like to speak on this item? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 10.6 on the agenda, Councillor Nation at the start of the meeting declared a conflict of interest, so we'll wait for Councillor Nation to leave the room. Thank you, Councillor Nation. So the next item on the agenda is the 2019-20 Capital Works Program update. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? Councillor Cusack.
Mayor, I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation as a motion.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Do I have a second to Councillor Marshall? Councillor Cusack.
Mayor, this is very straightforward. It's about where our capital works have got to. There is some need to look at some of those bigger projects that are in that pipeline where there are issues or where there are changes being flagged in the amount of money or what can be done at the time. It is about the types of adjustments that are regularly made and reported to council on a quarterly basis.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Councillor Marshall.
There's obviously the two projects listed in the report. I just want to make it absolutely clear that the change in project cost in relation to East Keilor Leisure Centre is not an additional $10 million. It's just that the works are now progressing well after probably getting off to a slower start than we would have liked, and so we have a payment that is due. So just thought it would be worthwhile making that clear. And in relation to Cross Keys, obviously the shared pathways, we noted the comment in there, and in difficult times we just have to think about our priorities and about when we do works, and we have to make some tough calls.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Would any other councillor? Councillor Sypek.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I totally agree with Councillor Marshall. With the East Keilor project, the builders are doing a really great job and they're ahead of schedule. And this is what you sort of would classify, if you're building a house, it's a progress payment. So what we're doing is we're just giving a progress payment. We're not actually adding on an additional $10 million like Councillor Marshall said. So that is clarification. And like Councillor Cusack said, this is a report that we actually fine-tuning our capital works. So we just want to be very, very transparent with the fine-tuning that we're doing.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Any other councillor? No? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. We will wait for Councillor Nation to come back into the room. I'd like to thank councillors again for keeping your speeches short and direct this meeting. Obviously, we're trying to do everything we can. At the moment, we have to sit in council meetings, but we're doing what we can by social distancing and keeping speeches short. For those tuning in at home, that's why there are less people around the table today, to make sure we've got adequate spacing. And Councillor Nation joins us back in for item 10.7 on the agenda, which is authorisations and delegations of Council Update 2020. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? And Councillor Marshall?
Yes, I move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. And a seconder, Councillor Nation. Councillor Marshall.
Just briefly, I will note that these changes are proposed in response to changes in legislation and also to organisational changes.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Nation. No. Would any other councillor like to speak on this item? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Councillors, the next item of business is notice of motion, and we don't have any tonight, so that brings us to item 12 on the agenda, which is urgent business. Councillors, do we have any items of urgent business tonight? No. So item 13 on the report, the delegates' report. Do any councillors have anything they'd like to report on their roles as delegates? No. So confidential reports. The next item of business is confidential reports, and there is one confidential report this evening. Councillors, can I please have a motion that the meeting be closed to the public under section 89(2)(f) of the Local Government Act 1989 to consider confidential reports? Move Councillor Gauchimarici, seconded Councillor Sypek. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Is carried unanimously. Thank you for everyone who is watching from home, and thank you for your interest. I now declare the non-confidential part of the meeting closed. Good night.